Hello! So, Demon Hunter. I have a bit of a checkered history with Demon Hunter. I played the early access from pre-purchasing Legion and leveled my original Alliance Demon Hunter and then proceeded to do nothing with her. And then, fast forward to Battle for Azeroth, I, for some reason, decided to start a Horde Demon Hunter and leveled her to max level and went through the intro for Val'jir? Nazjatar. I meant to say Nazjatar. I don't know how I forgot the name of this zone. I literally got the Alliance Slayer title right over there. And again, proceeded to do nothing with her. So, this poor character still had corrupted gear. So, that was a bit of a challenge leveling, was actually getting my gear sorted out. So, I decided that since I enjoyed leveling Guardian and kind of messing around with tanking as a druid, I wanted to kind of go back. I'd kind of messed around with Vengeance a bit at different times, but I kind of wanted to farm some of the War Glaives appearances and some of the different things from the Undermine raid. So, decided to level my Demon Hunter. I am convinced at some point they will give at least one other class the ability to transmog Warglaives. So, when and if that day comes, I want to have appearances ready. So, my initial first impression, which is going to be kind of what this is, as opposed to kind of a comparison of how a class or a spec was versus how it is, which I think some of the other kind of overviews tend to lean more that way. So, with that being said, the first thing are the stats. So, Demon Hunter, for being an agility class, is a bit different in that it uses parry for some reason. I have no idea why they added parry. Other than maybe at some point somebody felt they didn't have enough survivability, because parry will definitely help with survivability. And you get parry through critical strike, since it's not a standalone stat. So, normally parry is reserved for a class that uses strength as its primary resource. So, Paladin comes to mind most. Death Knight, although what I tended to do was basically avoid critical strike as much as possible and just try to get as much mastery as possible. And with the way the mastery works with the shield and death strike and everything, I remember during Timeless Isle I had 100% mastery, and you were pretty tough for PvP. Like, you could go 1v2, 1v3 for at least a minute. And that was actually a build for a while. There were a few different builds you could do with Death Knights back in the day for a time. And then, of course, there's Warrior. Although I haven't played Warrior all that much to safely say how they did with dodge and parry, which typically went hand in hand. So, Paladin does come to mind, though. Don't particularly care for parry because it tends to slow you down and cut into your DPS quite a bit. which I don't care for. I don't necessarily expect to be the top DPS, but I also don't want to be... if I'm out on my own, I especially don't want to feel like combat is taking forever. So, you have parry. I'm just kind of letting it fall where it is at this point. I'm not going to try to avoid critical strikes. I know I'm going to get gear that has it on there. My main goal was just to do the Undermine raid, and I can do that, so I'm perfectly fine. So whatever gear I get is whatever gear I get. That being said, I am trying to prioritize when I'm able to into Mastery, which is Fail Blood. Increases armor by percentage of your Mastery, of your agility. So increases armor by 40% of your agility. So, as I said, it starts to get a bit convoluted, I feel like, at certain points. Armor bonus is doubled while Demon Spikes is active, and then increases attack power. I think Master increases attack power of all tank specs, so that's pretty typical. So yeah, so I think I could potentially set this up similar to my Death Knight and just kind of try to put as much into Mastery as possible. My armor is at 38%. If I use Demon Spikes, it goes up to over 50. So, I'm happy with that. And that was me just doing a little bit of prioritizing into Mastery. After Mastery, I can't really tell too much. So leveling, what I did was I did one thing that I haven't done before, which was with the Warbands buff that you get. I was able to go to Tolbard and do some dailies there for a few days, which I like to do to get the Tabard. So I have a dedicated teleport to a capital city, so either Stormwind or Orgrimmar. So that leveled me up, but it didn't grant any gear. So I kind of worsened my gearing situation. Did some Burning Crusade dungeons. And then once I got to level 70, I had to focus on War Within content. So I ran the one and only dungeon that, or did the one dungeon that drops the one and only War Glaive that you can get from a War Within dungeon, which was the Stone Vault. And I ran it about 20 times. And then the last boss drops a fist weapon. I got the fist weapon. So I looked, and City of Echoes, the Anubian dungeon, also dropped the same, it's same appearance, different name, but same appearance. Ran it 3 times and had the Warglaive drop twice. So, and by the time I stopped running Stonevault, I was 75. So from 75 to 80, I just did random dungeons. So I got a little bit better geared, and then when I hit 80, I went to my Warband bank and pulled out anything I could that was appropriate, and geared up. And it was the day before reset, so I was really trying hard to try to get my item level up to do the Undermine raid, which I realized in order to do heroics or any raid, you have to be the same item level. which I find very strange because you used to do heroics to gear for LFR, and then you run LFR for normal, and so on and so forth. So it's really weird that you can't run heroics until you're the same item level to run raids. So, normal dungeons, the gear wouldn't have been an upgrade with gear that I got from my warband. I needed specific pieces or just one large upgrade to replace gear I already had. So came to the Undermine, did the Godfather, ran around, did some quests, things like that. Did anything I could think of that would grant equipment. And you had to be 606, I believe, and I was 605, so I was so close. And spent a fair amount of time running around doing stuff and just could not get a piece of gear to that would upgrade my item level. Contemplated buying something on the auction house, but I thought, well, it's just if I wait a day. I had some vault rewards. I know the vault rewards will be enough, so that was what I ended up doing. So, that being said, I did a variety of things. My stats have kind of been adjusted quite a bit from here and there, here to there. So I can't really tell outside of mastery. Versatility, I would probably start to prioritize next after mastery, I think. Not really hyped up on critical strike, partially for the fact that it grants parry, but just in general, it just doesn't seem to be. It's been a higher stat. For most of the time, I was leveling and now at max level, and I can't really see where it makes much of a difference. A little more haste, I think, would be nice. There are a lot of cooldowns that don't really work together necessarily, which I'll get into here in a minute. Outside of that, like Leech, I have because of a talent, the Soul Rendering talent that Demon Hunters have had forever. So increases Leech, gain additional Leech while Metamorphosis is active, so that's your demon form. Have Avoidance because it was on the weapon. Yeah, and then of course you get Dodge from Agility. Whether it says you do or not, every class that uses Agility gets Dodge. So, yeah, so outside of Mastery, I would definitely say it is recommended to get as much Mastery as possible. If you wanted a target goal for parry, I would say around 10-ish% or so is probably good. I want to say back in the day you needed 16% comes to mind, 20%, somewhere in there. Like around 20%, a lot of things like diminishing effects really start to kick in. For anybody that remembers playing when you had reforging. You could only reforge so much, and then it just basically didn't do anything. So, with that being said, that is mostly the talents. I admit I still kind of feel like I need to mess around with these a bit more, but I don't really see anything changing too much. So, a little more haste just might improve global cooldown, things like that. So, yeah. And then for the talents, I'm going to mostly focus on what I feel like are the standout things for the build that I have. Not necessarily going to cover all the talents for time's sake, just might briefly run through some different things. So, with that being said, I wanted to mention to begin with Fury, which is your resource you generate. generates very oddly. I had set up the talent initially, just kind of guessing, kind of using what I remembered, and then after I had done some couple days worth of daily quests in Tolbard, which you get about 10 or so each day, so I mean you get quite a bit. After that, I kind of went through and was looking at different talents to see if there was anything I could improve on, anything I wanted to kind of just play around with, see how it worked. By the time I did all the dailies, I usually had a talent point on each side that I could use, if not 3 or 4 talent points, depending. Once I started doing Burning Crusade dungeons to try to get some better gear, my experience was at different points. So sometimes I was about halfway to the next level. Sometimes I was about 3/4, what have you. So just depending on where it was, and you got quite a bit of experience, as I said, with the warband buff from just doing dailies. So it wasn't too bad. So I had moved some things around on the vengeance side, and my Fury regeneration, or Fury, gaining Fury gains were down quite a bit. And I don't know why, because I mostly moved like some of these over here that just mostly interact with soul fragments. The only one I did change was Agonizing Flames, which has to do with Immolation Aura. And I think after kind of just observing how this works, so I ended up putting everything back, because I was perfectly happy with the kind of initial setup I had. I was just, as I said, trying to see if there was anything I could improve on, anything I wanted to kind of play around with. And I think, so Fury generates kind of oddly in that it's unusual, because instead of just having an ability that you can use that grants you Fury, you have Immolation Aura, which grants you Fury over time, which, as far as I know, is about the only ability, if not the only ability in the game, that generates a resource over time. And I think the difference, I did take a talent that will generate more Fury when Immolation Aura critical strikes. But I didn't change this. So you would have thought this would have worked the same regardless, because it wasn't. As I said, I mostly changed these over here, which had to do with soul fragments and other passives and things like that. So I'm kind of confused there, but I pretty much settled on critical strike. If you can get it with Immolation Aura, will grant you more Fury. As I just said, through the talent. If everything works like it's supposed to, you can have a maximum of 120 Fury. Later on, I did take Unrestrained Fury, which increases your maximum Fury by 20. So if everything works like it's supposed to, so Immolation Aura and Fracture are the two things that will grant you Fury the most. So Fracture grants you 50, and then Immolation Aura will typically get you the rest of the way there. It is not uncommon for me to kind of start generating too much Fury, which is a weird problem to have. If it doesn't work, you end up with about 100, which is perfectly fine. Veil Devastation uses 50, and that is your best ability overall. It does the most damage, it does the most healing. 40-second cooldown, so I put it where regrowth is on my Guardian Druid. Because I kind of use it in the same way. And besides that, I wanted to mention you also have absorbs that you can use that kind of make using the abilities not so critical. If you use something, maybe not the ideal time, but also just helps overall with your health. So you have Soulmonger, which for some reason doesn't mention absorb, it mentions a shield. But when you consume a soul fragment and you're already at full health, it will convert it into a shield, which is rather nice because you will get soul fragments fairly easily. And soul fragments are... there we go, Shattered Souls. So, killing a target will sometimes shatter their soul, leaving a soul fragment behind for 20 seconds. The fragment will be consumed when you approach it. Healing you, consuming a lesser soul fragment, heals you for 7% of all damage taken. In the last 5 seconds, maximum 1% of maximum health. Consuming a demon soul will grant you 20% increased damage for 15 seconds. So, if you didn't know or needed clarification, that is what soul fragments are. So, they will shield you if you are at max health, which is helpful. Failed Devastation heals you for an additional 10%, and 100% of its healing is converted into an absorbed shield for 10 seconds. Shield yourself for 15 seconds, absorbing 1.1 million damage, which is extremely good. Bear in mind, the egg that I'm still using from last season on my Invoker shields for 4 million. So 1 million is extremely good. Consuming all available soul fragments to add to the shield per fragment. So, I like the fact that it works without the soul fragments, but you do have a way to enhance it if need be. And then when Fiery Brand expires on your primary target, you gain a shield that absorbs damage for 15 seconds based on your damage dealt to them while Fiery Brand was active. So, ended up just taking all of them, as you can see, and that seems to work perfectly fine. They do seem to overlap from what I can tell. So as I said, you should always be able to have a shield active, which is helpful. It is not a Death Knight. It is not a Blood Shield. But it will definitely help. And then after that, I wanted to mention Demon Spikes themselves, because this is about the most complicated ability, I feel like. So, Surge with Fail Power, increasing your armor and your parry chance by 10% for 10 seconds. So you can take a talent that will increase parry. So my thinking was, regardless of where my parry was, parry is good in certain circumstances, but it's not something I feel like you need all the time. Sometimes you want more damage, sometimes you want more survivability. So I took deflecting spikes just to have that kind of on-demand parry and armor. I find as I've leveled, and now that I'm max leveled, that I tend to just pretty much keep a charge of demon spikes up at all times. So as I get gear, I may start to worry less about critical strike. I'm not doing anything specific with this character, so it's not like the stats have to be somewhere. I'm probably going to do the like the hollow fall, some of the like the invasions and stuff. Probably do that on this character because that'll come out next week. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. So I'll see how I do kind of out in the world. Everything I've done has been, you know, I've done well. In the Undermine, just at 609 item level. I can solo rares, and different things like that. So I mean, I'm adequately geared right now, I feel like. So besides that, you take 12% reduced damage from after Demon Spikes ends, fading by 1% per second, so that seemed worthwhile to take. Increases the duration of Demon Spikes by 2 seconds. That was always my complaint before, was it was just a tad bit too short. While Demon Spikes is active, melee attacks against you cause the attacker to take physical damage, generates high threat. So, I took this so it worked more like Barkskin does on my Guardian Druid. So, if you need more armor and more parry, more damage is pretty good. As far as the threat, so that's one thing I would say I have a bit of a complaint about. So I use throw glaives. I liked the idea on my druid of having 2 AoE abilities to kind of open with. So I use swipe and what was the other one? Swipe and the other one that has the bleed. My mind is blinking. And Throw Glaive basically works like Swipe. It's really just there just for threat. It says it generates high threat. Typically, I remember back in the day if something said it generated high threat, if it specifically pointed that out, if you used it, everything would start to attack you. That's not been my experience with Throw Glaive. They do start to engage, and then as I'm running past to use another charge of Throw Glaive on another mob to kind of gather up, you know, some trash for the group to AoE down, or for me to AoE down. If I'm doing dungeon, or if I'm just out doing, you know, like a world quest in Undermined or something. What I tend to find is in a dungeon, I run past them, and then they tend to attack somebody else in the group. It doesn't do that on my druid, so I don't know why it's doing it on my demon hunter. So that was one reason why I started using demon spikes more, because it also specifically said with this that it generates high threat, and I did remember that. So between the two of them, I can generally hold threat and hold the trash together in one area, which then allows me to use like Sigil of Flame or Fiery Brand and Soul Barrier. Tend to use Firebrand like I think it was Druid of the Claw. Was the ability that I used on my Druid. And then Soul Barrier kind of takes place of Barkskin a bit. I use both of these in the same way that I do their what I think of as their equivalent on my Druid. And then I took Darkness. I really don't need Darkness, but there wasn't really anything else that I wanted to, that I thought would be appropriate to put the point into. So I thought, well, I'll just keep it for now, because Darkness is unique in that it will not just affect you, but it will affect anyone within its range. So that could be potentially helpful at some point as I'm learning the Undermine, the raid fights. So, yeah, what was the one I didn't take? Consuming soul charge reduces the cooldown of demon spikes. Yeah, that's not really been an issue. And then those are probably the main things that I've used for, kind of pointed out for this build. As far as Throw Glaive, there were some talents I took. So reduces the cooldown by 6 seconds. And let's see here, Throw Glaive ricochets to one additional target. You do have 2 talents you can choose from. So I originally had, they both grant 2 charges. One has a snare effect, which I originally had because I was kind of thinking maybe of doing PvP. For dungeons and PvE content, it kind of didn't make any sense, as you might imagine. So I switched over to give it an increased range, which made more sense, and that has worked much better. I took Feast of Souls, which used to grant Soul Cleave the ability to heal. Now it just increases the amount that it heals. I also took Pursuit, which causes lets your mastery increase your movement speed, which I think maybe was a I can see here. Where is the mastery for Havoc? Yeah, so Havoc's mastery increases its movement speed by default. So it kind of gives you a similar, kind of a like ability. And then I do use Chaos Nova quite a bit. Each enemy stun has a 30% chance to grant a lesser soul fragment. Let me see what I took. That, if I can spell, I have to spell it exactly. There we go. Yeah, so if you choose, depending on which hero talent you choose, I went with the one that worked with the abilities I was using the most, basically. I didn't overthink it too much. And that particular set of talents has a exposed weakness, which I don't think I've seen on another class outside of Rogue, I want to say. Rogue or Warrior. One of them has an ability that has a exposed weakness effect. And yeah, I think that was probably about it for the talents. A lot of them just pretty much enhance what I already have, for the most part. My hero talents will, after consuming 20 soul fragments or casting the hunt, which I'm not using. I took it originally because it had an AoE effect. So I was kind of looking at the hunt and soul carver, which was the artifact weapon effect. And the hunt said it did some AoE damage, and I just always liked using it. It has a cool effect to it. But the AoE damage was a bit lackluster and didn't really seem, for a minute and a half cooldown, just didn't really seem all that that useful. So just decided that survivability was a bit of an issue, because if I got into a situation where I was taking too much damage, I didn't really have anything to use. Demon Spikes on its own was not enough. At level 50, around level 50, when I started leveling, to really do enough to keep me alive. So I remember playing around with Soul Barrier the last time I played with Demon Hunter. And it worked okay for the most part. I don't remember it being working exceptionally well, but I also don't remember it being terrible. I just remember it doing what it said it did. So that's fair enough. So I eventually just got rid of it, moved, I had Fiery Brand where Soul Barriers just moved it over, and said, well, this works more like my Druid does anyway, and I was perfectly happy with that. So that being said, yeah, so as I was saying, we'll convert your next Thorglaive into Reaver's Glaive, which does more damage, ricochets to 3 additional enemies, and then enhances, begins a well-practiced pattern of glaive work, enhancing your next fracture and soul cleave. So I tend to use the glaive ability when it becomes active. The others, it doesn't really matter too much kind of what order you use them in. You do have to be careful with fracture that you don't use it and waste the fury. So I just have to keep an eye on my fury. And then you get one use of each of these. So I'll either use fracture and then soul cleave, or just soul cleave and then fracture, depending on where my fury stands. And yeah, so as far as Fiery Brand, I did take a talent that will allow it to spread. So you have to take it as part of your Vengeance talents. Let's see here. So we went over that. So Fiery Brand will give you an absorb. Fiery Brand also increases fire damage you deal to the target by 30%, which seems good. There's also another one that increases fire damage by 8%. I didn't notice a big significant difference there. And then the one that I wanted was Burning Alive. Every 1 second, Fiery Brand spreads to 1 nearby enemy. So this was like your... this was always treated as kind of like your I-Beam for Vengeance, like your big single target ability. And on a 1 minute cooldown is, I feel like, perfectly balanced for what it does. So I will use this usually on a boss fight, typically as part of the rotation. I will use a Throw Glaive and then Fiery Brand and Soul Barrier. Depending on the trash, depending on how difficult the trash is, I will use Fiery Brand and Soul Barrier. I try to use them together, which you don't have to. If there will be times where you may need to use Soul Barrier just on its own. But typically, if it gets to a point where I need to survive, I will just use Metamorphoses, which they took away. It used to have a target on location ability to use it, which I don't know why, because Havoc didn't, and it was really annoying to use. and they finally did away with that. So you turn into your demon form for 15 seconds when you use it on a 2-minute cooldown, which is, I feel like, a bit long. I think a minute and a half would probably be better. But 2 minutes isn't terrible, so you will get by. When Metamorphosis is active, it increases health, healing, armor, and shear, which is fracture. Fracture replaces shear. Generates 1 additional lesser soul fragment and 20 additional fury. So you're mainly using it for the increase to health and armor, not so much anything else. It doesn't work like it does on Havoc, where it changes your abilities into anything. Your abilities all stay exactly the same. So you don't have to worry about using abilities within a time frame. Much like Havoc, you can pick Demonic. So on Havoc, after you use I-Beam, it would put you into your demon form for 5 seconds. For Vengeance, once you use Fail Devastation, it will put you into your demon form for 5 seconds. Which is, I feel like it's nice. It kind of breaks up the monotony of combat. So, that being said, I did also try to, when I moved talents around, at first I kind of felt like Sigil of Flame, the cooldown, as I said, there were some cooldowns that are a bit that don't really synergize well with the other abilities. So Immolation Aura is 14 seconds, which is just an odd amount of time, just overall. And then Sigil of Flame, which is 30 seconds, which, taken on its own, this is perfectly fine. There's no way to lower it from what I could tell. However, I take that back. If you take Sigil of Flame, has 5 seconds reduced cooldown and 1 additional charge. You have 12% increased chance to parry attacks from enemies affected by your Sigil of Flame. So it worked fine, but once I had 2 charges, then I didn't necessarily feel like it needed 2 charges. Because I had gotten used to using other abilities. The other thing with all the sigils, they all have a 1-second delay when you use them for some reason, which doesn't really. I've never understood why. I'm sure I seem to remember there was a lore reason for that somewhere. That was one reason why I started using Chaos Nova more often. I actually had to wait until I leveled up and took a talent to get a talent point to take this. It only lasts 2 seconds, but if you use this and then Sigil of Flame, you're a little bit more guaranteed they stay where they should. I also took, precise sigils. So all sigils are now placed at your target's location. So that's a bit of a change, because they used to be placed where you were standing, and I kept thinking that the first few times I was using it, and then I eventually figured out that it was the target's location. They changed it for some reason, which I do and don't like. It can be helpful in situations, but it can also be very annoying because you're a melee class, so enemies are typically close to you. So if you use your throw glaive and you're not paying attention, and you're trying to throw down your Sigil of Flame, where you're standing, you actually end up putting it on the target you just used your glaive on. So you can see where, as a tank, that would be a bit of an issue. And then the 30-second cooldown kicks in, which is unfortunate. So, I think that's most of the abilities. As you see, I didn't really take anything I didn't need. You can take... So you have a counter spell and a Enrage remove ability with Consume Magic. You can take talents that will grant Fury when you use them, and they are successful. I took it away from the kick ability, basically, the counter spell, which increases the range. Doesn't even actually grant you the ability. You have the ability by default, I believe. Yeah. Definitely take something that removes Enrage effects, because that will... I have used this more than I've used a counter spell ability. So I couldn't really see the sense in using a talent point for something that I hardly use that grants Fury. If you're going to do Mythic Plus or something, you might want to consider taking this, because it's probably going to be more beneficial to you. But I remember I took it and put it into one of these. All active sigils activate 1 second faster, maybe? Yeah. So, definitely I would say take Precise Sigils and Quicken Sigils. Makes playing Demon Hunter in general a lot easier. And then as far as a rotation goes, so my main rotation, not unlike my druid, is throw Glaive for threat, Immolation Aura for the dot if it hits a target, and the Fell Flame that it puts around the game, so it'll generate threat. Fracture, provided my Fury is not maxed out. And then Soul Cleave, and then rinse and repeat. So throw Glaive, Fracture, Soul Cleave. That is the main rotation. And then there are a few things you can work in. So if you need healing, or you need to do damage to trash mobs, I will use Fail Devastation, especially for healing. I try to keep Fail Devastation when I need healing. Most of the time in combat you will need some sort of healing, so you can almost always keep this on cooldown. In addition, for trash or a boss fight, I will use Sigil of Flame. And then I will occasionally work in Demon Spikes when need be. And then Fail Devastation, I kind of moved the abilities around a bit, and then just kind of settled into how I had things on my Guardian Druid, because that's where I kept looking for things just out of habit. So much like with my Druid, where you have a talent that limits you to once every 20 seconds in order to use Regrowth in bear form, Fail Devastation has a 40-second cooldown, so it kind of works in a similar way. This is, again, as I said, your best ability overall. It does the most damage, or about the most damage of anything you have. Yeah. And it does the most healing. So outside of Metamorphoses, I would say this heals you more. Soul Cleave used to do more, and it just doesn't feel like it does anymore when it comes to healing you. According to Recount, it still is one of my highest damage abilities. It just doesn't feel like it does a lot when it comes to healing you. It does help. I remember it being very close to the way that Death Strike worked. Like you could, take your Feast of Souls, which would give it the heal component, and you could kind of set it up in a very similar way, and it would work in that way. It wasn't as good as a Death Knight, but it would work enough in that way that you could get by. So, Failed Devastation is very much a kind of situational. If you need health, or if you need to spend Fury and do damage, I almost constantly keep it on cooldown. And then from there, as I'm kind of, rinse and repeat. So Glaive Throw, Immolation Aura, and then I will pretty much keep one charge of Demon Spikes active, as I said. And that seems to work fine. If it does fall off, it's fine. You're not going to, it's not gonna kill you. It's not gonna wipe the group if you're in a raid or anything like that. You can put some time in between. I will say, it's not, Demon Hunter is not as forgiving with the rotation as Druid is. That was one of the things I said when I did an overview of Guardian. It was a very forgiving rotation because all the cooldowns were fairly short, and you don't have that here. So, like I said in the example I gave, if you use Sigil of Flame wrong, you're stuck to the 30-minute cooldown. Don't necessarily think the 5 seconds is worth kind of putting 2 talent points into here and all of that. So, once you kind of get used to it, both the delay and the cooldown and everything, and it also generates Fury as well, just to make a note of that. For my opener, I will use Throw Glaive to generate threats, Immolation Aura for the Fell Flame around me to help with threats, and to put a dot on any nearby trash. And then I will use Chaos Nova for the stun, and then Sigil of Flame, so the 2 seconds from Chaos Nova and the 1 second delay from Sigil of Flame should roughly line up. And then I will run through my rotation, before or after which I will use Failed Devastation depending on where my health is. For a boss fight, I will use Throw Glaive to pull, and then Fiery Brand, Soul Barrier. I'll use a charge of Demon Spikes just to help with that initial damage, and then I'll run through my rotation. Again, either using Failed Devastation before or after, depending on where my health is, and then I'll use Soul Cleave to fill in between with healing when Failed Devastation is on cooldown, and also to help keep my Fury down. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So, there you go. Hope that was helpful for you. Hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for watching.